All right. Are we recording, did you say?
Mark, can you confirm we're recording? I'm sure we are. Let me go check, just to make sure. Need some.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. I'll call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Tuesday, July 16th, 2024. Nancy, if you could call the roll.
Okay, Michelle Austin is absent. Carl Adams,
Here.
Brenda Hupka,
Here.
Camille Keys,
Here.
Eric Montiel. Don't see him yet. Stephen Lopez, don't see him yet. Noah Kaplan,
Here.
Aaron Martinez,
Here.
David Renson,
Here.
and sorry, Camille, did I call on you? Okay, sorry, I forgot to check you. And Chair Haggerty.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you, Nancy. And I would like to welcome David Renson as our new member here. We briefed him earlier on the process, but feel free to reach out with any questions, or I'm sure any of the commissioners here would be happy to help you out in any way. So with that, we'll get the approval of the meeting minutes from June 4th. If I can get a motion.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay. If I call for a vote on approval of minutes, unless there's any comment, questions? Nope. Okay. Yep. If we can call for a vote to approve them.
Sorry, Carl.
No, what is this for?
Meeting minutes from June 4th.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Brenda?
Aye.
Camille?
Yes.
Noah?
Aye.
Aaron?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
David, I think David has to abstain, I would assume, because he wasn't part of the meeting last time.
Unless you watched the meeting, yes. Perfect, he's good.
Okay.
All right, motion passes. Thank you.
All right. So with that, we have a public forum.
I apologize, Chair. I forgot to call on you.
I will abstain from it, just to clarify.
I'm sorry?
I'll abstain.
Okay.
And now we have a public forum. If there's any public here online.
We do not have anyone online or in the room, so no public
Awesome.
this evening.
Well, with that, I believe we can go right into staff presentation. I don't think we have to, this isn't a public hearing, so I don't have to open up anything. Yep. All right, go ahead, Will. I don't think it's good. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we'll all just share on this side. Okay, so we're so today we're going to talk about home occupations. We originally brought this to you guys on the June 4th meeting to kind of go over what the current code says about home occupations, what the American Planning Association best practices recommend, and then what those might look like for the city. So after that meeting, we went out to the community and did some outreach and some questionnaires for them to find out how the community felt about it. So we went to 3 neighborhood nights at Jason Park, Bellevue Park, and Cushing Park, as well as had a thought co-op with the Chamber of Commerce. And so through those meetings, the presentation today will basically be going over what the results of those surveys were, and then kind of leave it open for discussion after that. All right. So this slide is mainly just seeing the prohibited uses, and there's a lot of words on there, and we'll jump to the next slide where it's a little cleaner. But you can kind of see that there are the two uses on the left that have a pretty favorable response to maybe having those ones looked at for maybe removal off the prohibited uses list. Then there's a few that are kind of mixed, and then a few that are pretty heavily negative, like dispensing of hazardous materials. That one's probably sticking on the home occupation prohibited use list, but had to ask. So just kind of going off of what was on the previous slide, we have those first two, which were the animal care uses, as well as the hair beautician related uses. So both of those received pretty favorable responses from the community. So most were in favor of potentially looking at removing those from the list from the people we surveyed. The next ones, so the automobile repair, had kind of mixed reviews. Number 4, the sale, storage, or assembly of guns, knives, and other weapons. So this one I left as that red indicator on the slide because that's what I had in the staff report. But if you look on this graph, it's pretty similar to the other ones, so it probably would be better suited to be that orange color also, so that kind of mixed opinion one. But yeah, so just kind of a clarification on why that one's red on this slide. Food or beverage services, so that's another one that was a little bit mixed. Then we get into the 3 that were pretty consistently negative. So that's the storage or operation of large vehicles, such as towing, landscape maintenance, and construction businesses, the hazardous materials, and then marijuana centers. Those 3 were pretty comfortably negative, I would say, as far as the responses we got. And then the last one, the manufacture of wine, distilled spirits, or malt beverages, was about break even, as far as 50% of people were pretty okay with that getting removed from the list, and then 50% of people wanted to see it stay on the prohibited use list. So, yeah, basically a comfortable range of I'll remove and keep on there. Okay. And then the second part of what we asked the community were 5 kind of questions that we heard from council as well as this commission about kind of changes to the standards that all home occupations have to meet. And so you can kind of see on this one, and again, I'll jump to the next slide where it's a little bit more readable. But you can kind of see that basically every answer had about a 5-to-1. In favor versus opposed to the regulation changes or to the questions. And so the questions we asked were, the first one, should home occupations be allowed to operate in the backyard of their home? So this, when we talked about at the last meeting, was those uses like someone wanting to grow flowers in their backyard, things like that are currently prohibited in the code. So we asked if maybe things like that could be allowed in the backyard, which had a very favorable response. Next one is, should home occupations be allowed to have temporary stands in the front yard for limited amounts of time? So, on the smallest scale, that could be like your, lemonade stands, but, think about it also like if you, had like clippings or things like that for vegetables, you could have that out there. Or any kind of temporary stand where it's maybe out there for a couple of days a year, kind of like a more formal, garage sale where you're selling actual products. Next one was, should home occupations be allowed to hold small group classes? So this one came up due to a violation for someone wanting to do a glass blowing business out of their garage. So the glass blowing part's fine, but the doing classes was the problem. So you can only have one customer at a time in a home occupation currently. So the community was generally in favor of allowing for small group classes. So that could be, someone having a 3 or 4 person yoga class to, potentially that glass blowing class, or maybe, group lessons for, kids learning to play the sax, any of that kind of stuff. Well, next one is, would you want to be notified if your neighbor was proposing a home occupation that was slightly more intense than what is currently allowed by city code? So the reason we asked this one is, at the previous meeting, we kind of talked about potentially having 2 tiers of home occupation. So the first tier being just how it is in the code today. So it doesn't require any sort of planning like permit that you have to get. We just review it as staff as part of their business licensing process. So that'd be that first tier. And then a second tier where maybe you can meet most of the criteria, but there's, one thing that you can't meet. So maybe you wanted to have, 2 employees rather than 1, or you wanted, maybe you wanted to, or these classes. And really, mostly all these other questions that we're asking. But, those ones where maybe they're on this higher tier, where they come, potentially before this commission as a hearing to get approval for that. And so most members of the community said they would want to be notified. So that could be like a sign like we do for variances, or some sort of, narrow mailing, or, like a knocking on doors, that kind of thing. And the last question, should home occupations be allowed to have more than 1 employee that does not live in the home? And this one also, as you can see on all of these, were pretty considerably in the favorable choice. Okay. Then we also reached out to all of the other city departments regarding home occupations, and there are some concerns about the prohibited use list and removal of some of these things. I would say the group that had the biggest concerns for it were our utilities and our code enforcement departments. As far as code enforcement, it does open up opportunities for new types of nuisance cases, because there's just going to be more intense businesses if these home occupations were to change. So there's concerns about that portion of it. A lot of it I think is to do with like the animal related uses. I think that's a big topic for code enforcement. And the other one is our utilities department. Most of these uses, if they were to be removed from the list, would more than likely require some form of trap to make sure that contaminants aren't going into the sewer system. And I kind of had a back and forth discussion with our utilities department, and it's not necessarily that this would be a deal breaker requirement for these home-based businesses, but it would definitely be a cost for them to start these businesses. So even if it was hair care, there's potentially a need for them to install some sort of trap for their sewer system. All right, and so that's really it for this presentation. Before I get into these questions, does anyone need me to go over anything we went over the last meeting, or need any of that?
I guess do we want to ask questions on any of the information provided or anything that was in here first, or do you want to be more direct to go through these specific comments or questions first?
Yeah, these are the questions I'd like input from you guys tonight, just if y'all need any more background info before we jump into discussion.
Any questions from Commission? Aaron?
Yeah, I had a question about there was negative feedback around storage of construction type equipment. And I'm just thinking of the case where, you've got a roofing contractor that parks his truck out front with several ladders and a ladder rack on top. How does that fit into to this? What would that scenario look like under the code?
Yeah, I think that one is probably one of the ones that needs, for sure out of this process is some clarification on what exactly that's looking at. A landscape truck parked in your driveway where you're doing that, that's one thing. This is more like if you had like landscape materials and things
Sure.
like that. So like
Yeah. Or
if you were a
backhoe,
contractor and you
something
have like a pile of like lumber in the backyard that you're like then taking to other sites, that would be a problem. If you have your one landscape truck and you just park it because that's where you live, and then you drive it away somewhere else to do that's different. But that severity is a little nuanced.
Right, it doesn't read that way necessarily,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question for you. The animal care section seems like it is pretty variable. So animal hospital or even a kennel is likely indoors, whereas animal daycare probably has an outdoor component. So it doesn't seem like it's necessarily as casual of a use as something that is fully indoors potentially.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious on some nuance there.
Yeah, and that one's interesting. That when we were talking to the community, it's kind of hard to describe it in a bar graph, but it seemed like a lot of people were pretty comfortable with the dog grooming portion of that use. The part where they had more concern is some sort of kennel or things like that where there's potentially going to be multiple dogs running around the backyard. Things where you can really limit the number of animals to a very small number seemed to be something that was important to the people we talked to.
Yeah, my question's similar to Aaron's. When you were talking to people about a towing business, a landscape business, a construction business, were people aware that it's unlawful, regardless of this business, to park those kind of transport trailers? I'm looking at the at Municipal Code 1161. They can't park that on the street anyway. It has to be on the driveway. Are people really aware of that impact? I mean, of the kind of impact that, and by the way, I can store landscape materials in my backyard today. There's no law that says I can't just fill it up with timber.
Yeah. It's when it's a business that's the issue. But yeah, I mean, not really as far as discussing like storing those on the street or anything like that. I don't think that question came up for the people that came to talk to us.
There was a couple things where a business license is required. I don't think I caught quite when is the business license required and when is it not, and when is it just allowed to happen?
Yeah. So we asked this question to our finance department to get clarification also. And generally speaking, if you're running a business in Inglewood, you need to have a business license. So it doesn't really, there's not really like a, this much sales tax or that kind of thing. It's pretty much anything. I think the only things that you probably wouldn't necessarily, and I don't want to speak for them, but be like maybe like your work from home things where the actual, business itself is somewhere else and you're just working out of your home. But basically anything that has a like establishment or an entity in Inglewood would need to get that business license. So really anything that comes through, we're a reviewer on for those business licenses.
I have a question about the manufacture of wine, distilled spirits, or malt beverages. And I don't know if this has been addressed before, but at what point is the line crossed from like a hobby brewing thing to a business? Because this is specifically saying manufacture, not necessarily selling or distributing.
Yeah. So all for any of this, it's really about whenever you decide that you want to sell the things you're making, that's where they become a home occupation. So, even similar for marijuana centers, you could you can grow a certain number of plants in your backyard, and that is what it is as far as regulations go. So that's not a problem. Similar to the same thing with manufacturing of wine, distilled spirits. You can make it for yourself. You can have friends over and they can consume it with you all you want. But as soon as you start selling it, that's where it becomes the prohibited use.
Okay, and then just to be sure, selling it from the home itself or selling it anywhere?
I believe it'd be selling it anywhere.
No?
But just to confirm, that could still be a code enforcement issue, separate from the home occupations question, going back to what you were saying about traps and other things. Like manufacturing without sale could still raise some of those other concerns that are not a home occupations question, right?
Yeah, as far as that portion, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I can ask our utilities department between then and now. But yeah, I'm not, similar to a lot of these though, if you're doing it on a small enough scale to where only you're the one consuming it, it's probably not making too much of a dent. But as soon as you start doing it 8 to 10 times a day, it starts being a problem.
I guess I just want to make sure that wherever these regulations land, that we're consistent about why the regulation is needed. It seems like if we think, for example, that manufacturing beer or wine at home should require notification and a hearing, and a big part of that is because of the potential code enforcement piece, that impact is the same whether you're selling it or not. It's just based on the scale of how much you're making, right? So it seems to me that it should be consistent across what the requirements are, based on that impact, not based on whether or not you're then selling your product.
And I hear what you're saying. No, I think there's a very distinct difference of having people come to your home. And so the whole selling off-site, I feel like maybe is even a little bit of a different distinction for me. And that's, I think the impact of what you do in your home when you're making things for yourself is fine. When you start introducing traffic, parking, people, I think when you're starting to impact neighbors is where I think that home occupancy needs to live. But I think the point that you bring up are the code enforcement things are real as well, regardless of that impact on neighborhoods. But you're right for this particular topic. Carl, did you have some?
For the brewing thing, it's if you're just giving it to friends or whatever, is there if you make $1, if you sell one bottle, do you have to have a business license? What is there a limit on how much you can?
Yeah, I mean, as far as as soon as you start selling your product, then you are a business and you would need to get that business license.
Okay. Earlier, you had the auto servicing as had a yellow sticker on it, like it was mid-range. But that one there, that's hugely a no.
Yeah, so I kind of took all of the ones that were like within like a 2-to-1 or so ratio of yes to no's. And you can interpret these for yourself however you'd like. I just kind of put that to help with a little bit of discussion as far as these middle ones. I mean, the ones that I feel like are, very, very comfortably no, or, for sure, like the hazardous materials and the marijuana ones. Those have like a 5-to-1 negative ratio of votes. But yeah, I mean, if, as far as, how you want to interpret, all those other ones, y'all's interpretation is probably better than mine as far as how to treat those ones. So,
And this is an informal survey that was taken. I think we should all take this with a large boulder of salt in terms of the actual reflection. I think this is a data point, but this shouldn't be the only thing that guides our decision.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
what was
Carl.
the scale of input? Like, how many people were represented in this?
I mean, you can see the scale on the left there. Most of these had about 30 or so people between the yeses and the nos, I would say, maybe 25 respond to it. So, and that's
Were they-
pretty, and this one is a little bit less than that. It was like in the 15 to 20 range. I think these ones suffered the having too many words on a piece of paper for a lot of people to feel like reading all the questions.
Well, what was the location of the questions where you had to?
Yeah, we asked them at Jason, Bellevue, and Cushing Park.
Pretty much residential areas.
Yeah, I mean we're limited. We were limited kind of to the neighborhood nights that were in June, so that we can kind of keep moving along. But yeah, we basically went to the first 3 that we could.
Group classes you got a green on that. I think that would be all right. It says small group. What designates a small group?
Yeah, I think most of the one business that ended up moving to a brick and mortar location after they were given a notice of violation for this one, I think had 5 people in that class. I don't really particularly have a number for you as far as what that could be, and that certainly something if any of y'all have opinions on it. But that would be my, I guess, impression would probably be in that like 4 to 5 range.
As far as why this is being done, it's basically, if I consider my house, what I want next door, one of the big factors is parking. I don't want a brothel next door. I don't want a liquor store next door. I don't want a pot shop next door. I don't want a yoga class next door. Whatever brings in a lot of cars, I don't want to have it in my neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Is that we're talking a lot about the prohibited uses list, and whether things come or stay off that list. But there's still the standards that we talked about last time, and so like for parking, regardless of what type of home occupation you have. So whether it was one of these 4 to 5 person classes, or whether it was someone wanting to sell their wine out of their house, you're limited to the parking on site, as well as the parking right in front of your house. That how you regulate that is another question as far as enforcement, but that should be the kind of limiting factor. So if you have a 50-foot wide lot, you're probably only getting 2 parking spaces in front of your house. So that's something else to keep in mind, is that there are mechanisms in this ordinance that limit things to a certain degree as far as how big these businesses could get.
As far as business vehicles, I did some work with Inglewood Lock and Key recently, and I was looking for a yellow van to show up. I was waiting for the guy to show up, and he had a white van. I asked him about that, and he said in his he lives in a HOA, and they will not allow him to park a work truck with a name on the side of the truck in his resident there. So I don't know, we probably don't have a whole lot of HOAs in Inglewood, but that was interesting though.
There's not a ton of them.
Go there.
Yeah, in regard to the parking for the small group classes, you're saying if you have a 50-foot lot, you probably get 2 people in front. Does that mean that they wouldn't be able to park on the on the street in front of the neighbor's house?
I mean, as far as the way I think I still have a slide up here somewhere from our old presentation. So this this very long number 5 is the parking one. All parking necessary for the use shall be confined to the garage, driveway, or street directly in front of the dwelling, meeting the applicable residential building and site design standards. So yeah, I mean, as far as that regulation goes, it should be, very limited as far as that number of parking. Again, how you enforcing that's probably trickier said than done. But yeah, it should be at a scale similar to that. So
Makes sense.
I do want to just kind of steer back to.
I was just going to ask the
these
same thing. Why don't we
questions.
go into these questions and maybe clarify what you're looking for in each one of these?
Yeah. So the first one, after seeing these results, is this second tier of where you go to a public hearing for the home-based business still something the commission wants us to pursue? So that could either be for we could have potentially a group of uses that are kind of similar to a conditional use right now, where these uses, if you apply for one, need to come for a hearing, or that could also be kind of similar to the questions we asked, where it's you want to have 2 employees rather than 1, you come for a hearing, or you want to use the backyard where it's currently not allowed, do they come for a hearing? So that kind of thing. The second one is
Before let's go through each one.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for all of us. Is there we have the category ABC, right?
Yeah.
Are those all of them? And is there a list of all of the uses? I didn't see that anywhere that we would have, that we could, if we wanted to create a second tier. I don't know if we do or not, but is there a list of all of them that we could look at?
Yeah, so right now the way the code operates is there's allowed and not allowed, right? So the not allowed are those 9 or so prohibited uses. And then all of the allowed ones are basically everything else, assuming you can meet the performance standards. So those performance standards do knock out, some of the more commercially retail, a lot of customers to and from kind of uses. So there's not necessarily a list of what all those are. But as far as, kind of this tier system, basically the first tier would be pretty much what the code is today. So we have, 8 performance standards that say, when you look at it from the outside, it should look like a house and not like a business. And so it limits, everything else from that. Whereas this category B would be those other home occupations. So, that could be potentially, making some sort of improvements to the property that make it look a little more like a business. That could be, making these, additional changes to where, there's, more employees or more people at the same time coming to the property. Really, it's just an opportunity for the kind of nuances of home occupations for people to have a chance to have their voice heard as far as if their neighbors care or don't care.
And I think that would, just 1 second, that would provide, that would be the only time in this that we're showing right now, category B would be the only time neighbors could provide comments, would be during a public hearing.
Correct.
And so basically anything with category A would be more just within the office side of things, would be staff's decision at that point, right?
Right. So yeah,
Okay.
category A would be us administratively reviewing it during the business licensing process, and then category B would be probably a public hearing before this board.
Well, along that same line, does it give not just neighbors, but the actual business owner a chance to apply for a business owner? If they fall into category B, for instance, and I'm going to bring this up again, is having a landscape business. Sometimes you wouldn't even know that person has a landscape business unless they have a sign on their truck, because all they have is a lawnmower. And also another one is landscapers often do snow removal. And the code again says you can't park it on the street, but you can have it in your driveway. Now, he may get, one of the neighbors might turn him in. I would be all for this potential change if this is an avenue for some people to appeal these restrictions. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with the word appeal, just because it's giving them an opportunity at the beginning rather than us saying no. But otherwise, yeah, I would agree. It's just an opportunity for those ones that if it grows to the full parameters of the property, it might start becoming a nuisance. But on a limited scale, potentially there's not an issue with those. So yeah.
So go ahead, Aaron.
Is it anticipated for that public hearing process for category B for the commission or for staff to add additional conditions to the operation of that business? Like they're asking for yoga classes and they want to do 10 people, but the condition could be you could only have 4 people or something like that.
That was my impression, but it's up to you guys how that would kind of function. But that was kind of my thought is like you said, or limiting if there was if we kept dog grooming business on that list of ones, only one dog there at a time, that kind of thing too. So
And maybe just to even take one step back, the intent today is to discuss, the concept, see what items we think we want to add. Then staff will draft up proposed changes, which will get sent to us for review before our next meeting, which will be an actual public hearing to discuss the actual changes and whether we agree, disagree, want to make changes.
Mhm.
Is that accurate? Okay,
Correct.
So while we're having these discussions, I think it's really important to understand that we'll also have the opportunity to read the proposed revisions and be able to still comment on those. So I think providing staff the direction so they can make those initial changes, I think is going to be important. So going back to this first question, thank you. Well, based on the results of the input, should a second tier be added that would require a public hearing? I guess would be the question for the commission right now. Go ahead, Carl, and then Camille.
Is there something that's just covers a general area, like you don't have anything on artificial intelligence designers in there? So that could be a lot of people coming to a resident, but just something general that explains that this can't be done because of this.
Yeah, I mean, any use that's not on the prohibited use list could potentially be a home occupation. Where that list gets cut down from there is the performance standards. So the performance standards are going to limit a lot of high volume uses. So yeah, your AI creator probably could do their business because they're probably just doing that with that much customers, but high volume uses are going to be limited by those performance standards.
Camille?
So is this question whether or not there should be a second tier added, is that after we decide, okay, so cosmetologists are a permitted use now? Or is it just for everything that is currently a prohibited use?
Right. So this would be, like I said, this could be anything from, we could potentially put uses in this second tier where they have to come before the commission, or it could also be performance standards that they want to deviate from. So again, like more employees, more customers.
Do you want to show maybe the prohibited list? The prohibited use list, I think, is a few pages up. Yeah. So is the question, would like the first two fall into like a category B that would have to come with a public hearing, and then 3 through 9 would still be prohibited?
Right, or however you guys want to divvy that up. But yeah,
Okay.
and it's up to you. Like they could, like 1 and 2 could completely come off the list and just be a
Allow
a category A, good to go, or they could be in that second
secondary category.
tier if you wanted them to
Okay.
be as well.
Does that help clarify?
It does.
Okay, yeah. Camille, I think you had a question.
I was just gonna say, I think that having the administratively approval ones is great, and then having some that are a little bit more high intensity, have a hearing. I was curious about the conditional use permit or whatever similar process might be used to review the ones that would be category B, if there might be like a time frame approval for like an initial approval, like, I don't know, 2 years to make sure they're being good neighbors, and then they could be evaluated again, and then for a period longer the next time or something approved.
Yeah, so some sort of like re-up period or something like that. Okay.
I've got a question about the signage. I want to say that I read something that R1A does not allow for signage for your business, but R1B and R1C do.
Yeah.
For those, as a starting point, I don't understand why one neighborhood essentially says we can't have signs here and you can. Generally, I think it's an opinion, but business signs in a clearly residential neighborhood tend to be a drawback, and I would think a lot of people might feel the same. And I wonder if there's a need to allow signage overtly versus prohibiting signage, even if you allow the business, because let's be honest, everyone's online now anyways. No one's finding the business because of the sign. They already know where it is. They found it on their phone. And I have no problem if my neighbor wants to run a business next door, as long as it's, an acceptable use. But as soon as they put a big, sign, and I know there's size requirements and all that, but visually, I think that starts to impact the neighborhood differently than just operating a business unseen from the street. And I'm curious about what's the real need for a sign at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, we can certainly, look at that. I will say, as far as the code next went, it went from R1A has consistently been a no sign or area. But for the rest of it, it went from, I think, 1 square foot to 2 square feet. So they are pretty small signs, but
Right, but why the difference between what privileges R1A over R1B and R1C? It doesn't make sense.
yeah, that's up for all the people that were here whenever that got approved. So
I guess my point is, it seems like
Are you saying that couldn't be adjusted with this language also, or theoretically could it be? I guess is the question. Because this is going to be revising this
Yeah.
section.
yeah, I'm certainly happy to put a change in there, either direction. If we
But the
want on that.
land use code allows for a 2 square foot sign, does it not?
Yeah, so the zoning code has you can have up, in the R1A, you can't have a sign. In every other zone district, you can have up to a 2 square foot sign.
Aaron, did you have another?
Yeah, I had a question about, and I'm not seeing it in here, so maybe I could have invented this, but I thought there was somewhere in the performance standards about the, a home-based business must essentially be imperceptible outside of the lot. So we're talking about noise from mechanics and things like that. Where does that exist?
So it is number 7. So no equipment, machinery, or operation shall be used in such activities that are perceptible off the premises because of noise, smoke, odor, dust, glare, radiation, electrical interference, or vibration. So.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm assuming, and the reason I'm asking this is because I think that, a neighbor who is dead set against any sort of business operations out of somebody's house could certainly use this to just put the kibosh on that altogether. Is there any consideration of either modifying this or, how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I mean, my own opinion would be that I think this one is a pretty important one to have in there, because at the end of the day, home is the first important word, and then occupation's the second, right? So it should look and quack like a home, and then happen to have a business in it. So if you start, having, really noisy operations going on, it starts, diminishing that first home part and really.
I'm thinking of a dog grooming business in a house where there's a dog barking inside the house that could be heard in the neighbor's, house, so.
Yeah, I mean, it potentially could be something where if you wanted to look at, like the number 5 for the traffic, it has like an abnormal to a residential neighborhood requirement. If you wanted to look at something similar to that, where adding some language like that to it could potentially be something. So nothing more than abnormal to a residential house.
No, just a second. So you're saying like you could say you could have noise from 7 to 9 or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or like everyone mows their lawns at some point. So if you're mowing your lawn one time a week,
Well, that's
that's
a good
not.
point too. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Noah.
So I'm in favor generally of having the second tier that would require a hearing. I'm also in favor of liberalizing the categories of things that wouldn't require a hearing. And I think I like the approach of potentially using some language around what would be considered normal or abnormal for a residential use. So, going back to what we were talking about before, I can use my entire backyard as a garden right now if I want to. But if I start selling my produce, then it becomes a home occupation and I'm using my backyard. I would rather the code not take an opinion based on whether or not I'm selling that produce, but based on the impact. So if I'm using my entire backyard for a garden and that has no impact on my neighbors, then it should be presumptively allowed. And then the hearing step should only be used for those things that are fundamentally different from how the property could be used for a non-commercial purpose. Things like we talked about with if you're bringing more than one person as a guest at a time, that would be different from how a resident would typically use their property. So I would like to see us both add this tier with the hearing, but also move more things into that presumptive approve category so that we are not, flooded with hearing requests and we're making it easier for people to operate these businesses.
Did that make? I think I caught what you were saying there. Noah, does that make sense for what that request is? Okay.
Yeah, so more flexibility in the category A before we start kind of going into the category B.
Is there not a list of jobs or certain types of jobs that don't even require review or don't even technically require a business license?
Yeah, I mean, so again, anything that you're, creating, buying, selling in Inglewood requires that business license.
Even like professional services, for example, where you're not producing a physical thing?
Right. Okay. Yep. Okay, so I think I got good input on the first one, unless anyone has, any reason we shouldn't have a second tier, but you want to go to the next one?
I think so. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so
Let me get a question in before you. There's a lot of regulations here. So who enforces that?
I mean, for the majority of it, if it's in Title 16, it's our department that enforces it.
Who?
Our department, so community development.
Okay.
So is that inspectors then? Like that would like some who? I guess Carl's question is about like who are you going out there? Like who?
Yeah. So if someone's running a home occupation currently that's on this prohibited use list, we'd be the ones issuing the violations.
Because you're going to have hundreds of small businesses. Can they cover that, or can they watch over that many?
And I think Carl, that's why I think there's so many out there right now that probably are not currently allowed by regulations. And so how do we like say, these really aren't having an impact there, there are people working out of their house, right? And it's not impacting everybody. So how do we administratively allow all of those and then be able to really determine which ones to spend the time on?
Yeah, and I mean, complaints are going to happen, or one way or the other. When it's an allowed use, it's a lot easier of a conversation than if it's a prohibited one. But yeah. I mean, currently we have, in any of our current planners would be the ones that issue violations for those. Okay, so question 2 though. Should the expanded allowances outlined on the previous slides be allowed for all home occupations? So, again, that kind of more flexibility of category A, or should those be reserved for home occupations that go through the public hearing process? So really, these 5 kind of questions we asked the community, would you guys like to see those be part of that category A uses or those category B hearing uses? Yeah, so these things, so, operating your backyard, group classes, should, all home occupations be allowed to do those, or only the ones that go through a hearing process?
Is this a all or none, or is it, we can, okay,
Yeah,
go
break
ahead.
them up however you
Okay.
feel.
Go ahead.
I think the small group classes is very arbitrary, and I think it really, what is small, and, would need some review. I'm open to, like, I think right now it's 1 employee. I'm open to increasing that. I'm not sure if there's a limit on how many maybe it's 1 visitor at a time, up to 8 per day, something like that.
Yep.
I'm open to tweaking those, but just arbitrarily saying small group classes, yes, I don't think so. Especially certain neighborhoods, certain contexts, certain blocks, where parking is always an issue. I think that needs to be taken, needs to be looked at.
So provide some sort of limitation. So they talked about whether we get rid of the 8, but maybe
I feel like you're
increase
saying
it.
small group classes being allowed is too.
But actually, so
open-ended.
define small group. So
Either-
is that what you're asking for, is define small group?
Yeah, either saying no, that should be a category B,
Okay,
or category A if it has some numbers to it.
okay. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I would just second that. I think what should happen when the standards get revised is to put some numbers to what goes into category A and category B. And consistent with what I said before, I'm comfortable with pushing more things into category A. So for example, I would be comfortable with something like up to 4 customers at a time is category A. 5 or more is category B, and then you go to a hearing, something along those lines. Up to 3, non-resident employees is category A, right? Just, I'm comfortable with that approach and just having some numbers to those things to limit what requires a hearing. But yeah, I agree with Aaron that to me, it's not really like a yes or no question. It's better to look at how are we going to revise the standards to put some specificity on these things, as opposed to just having it say, we're going to leave the standards as they are and everything's going to go to a hearing.
Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense for small group classes and employees. So maybe push those to 4 and then maybe like 2 employees.
Yeah, and one more would be stands in the front yard. So again, you'd have to have, similar to signage limitations, you'd have to have size limitations, you'd have to have a number of days, you'd have to have, like, you'd want the standards to be specific on that as well.
Good, Bill.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the questions that that brings up in my mind is we kind of talked a little about how the limited parking limits how many people can participate in one of these home occupations at a time. So if the number for small were, say, 4 or 5, but the parking on site and in front of the property was 2 max, or like 2 or 3, then would they be allowed to go with the 5 that's allowed by that number we've established, or are they limited by parking?
Yeah, that's a.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, that one is more of a nuisance issue, more so than a limit on those kind of things. Because to take that example, if if me and, 3 buddies go to a wine and painting class, we could all just carpool and then you only need 1 car. So that one's more, I feel like in there as a catch for the nuisances where you have, 15 cars parked on the street that are taking up all the parking.
Okay. So, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I'm in the camp where I would rather allow this stuff, but allow neighborhoods to have a recourse, to have a hearing, should it become a nuisance. So we're not, listening to every single thing that comes before them, but if it does become a daycare that is, well, daycare's already allowed, but they can have a lot of employees, something like that where, okay, this is getting to be too much. So the answer to your question is again, because that's a confusing question. Go back to the slide, please, because it's not in this online.
Which slide?
You're asking the question.
I
There it
can
is.
start,
Yeah.
this one.
Should the expanded allowances outlined previously be allowed for home occupations or reserved for? Okay, I don't think we need to go through the public hearing process unless it becomes a nuisance. Does that answer the question?
I think so. So can you go back to the questions and real quick? I know we just asked you, not these questions, I'm sorry, to the,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So should home occupations be allowed to operate in the backyard of their home? Is that a yes, no?
Yes.
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 Yes, yes. Carl's yes. Camille, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Does everyone feel good about that? No, I think you already said yes. Yeah, okay, good. Occupations be allowed to have temporary stands with the limitations, I think that does that mean a lemonade stand, technically speaking? I just curious, like,
As far as lemonade stands go, most of those children aren't calling us to find out
Okay.
if they can
Fair enough,
run their
okay.
lemonade stand.
But I mean,
there's
Yeah.
one like this one. I see it. I live in Denver, and I see it. Every spring there's a couple people that do, like tomato plants and things like that, and so they'll have a stand for the first 2 weekends in spring where they'll have all those
Cool.
things you can buy them there.
so it sounds like yes with some size guidelines or restrictions.
Right.
Okay, so, yep, okay.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah,
real quick?
please.
I mean, I see that all the time in my neighborhood too, where it's 1 or 2 people for 1 or 2 weekends. I would argue that the idea of having those people try to get approval formally is never gonna happen.
No, I think that's why we
You're saying-
allow that to
You're saying
happen.
that's allowed, it's
yes.
only if it's, okay,
Yeah.
got it, just making sure.
Yeah, that's what we're saying, that is allowed and unless it's outside the standards that we provide. Okay, allowed to hold small group classes, I think we're saying yes, but define it. I think 4 would be the number just for me. I'm sure there's open to interpretation for others if they want to give Will some guidance on what you all think is a small group. I'm sure he'd love to hear it.
5 people, but
Four.
not more than that.
What's interesting is it's the impact of parking that it's getting at,
Right,
so.
but that's-
we're
the
talking
parking
about
will still
number of
be there,
people, but- Yeah,
But what if you live by the light rail, maybe
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
carpool, we can't assume that every person is.
Biking, yeah.
I mean, is there a way to say 6 people as long as it doesn't impact?
But parking still
Parking,
is
something
the
like that,
limitation?
yeah.
Okay, is that,
It doesn't be a nuisance, right?
okay. Everyone good with that? Is that clear for you too, Will? 6 I think we're saying 6 allowed, but parking, as long as the parking and nuisance still is the precedence that has to be maintained.
How many people were at the glass blowing event?
I think they had 5 is what their classes size were.
Sorry, go ahead now.
So we might be cutting 20% of his business out, but we can brainstorm that one and see what that regulation looks like.
Who would determine
Yeah,
when there's a nuisance, right?
It's the
Is that-
neighbors when they
is
can't
that
park.
Is that the
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
door neighbor that
The parking
determines?
limitation would apply, so that's what I'm saying, they could have 6 as long as the parking limitation, I guess the nuisance, I shouldn't have said nuisance, but sorry, I'm interrupted, go ahead, no.
So I disagree with that one. I said last time, and I would reiterate that I don't like that the regulation sends the message that the street in front of your house is part of your parking. I would prefer that the parking be handled separately from this. I think it is difficult to determine you know, how many cars are associated with how many people, and those aren't going to be consistent across neighborhoods. And you know, there's a lot of neighborhoods in Englewood where you could have a yoga class that everybody walks to, right? And so I would rather us handle parking as a separate issue, consistent with how you would handle somebody who's having a party or any, you know, any other use, whether commercial or not. We should be consistent. And as a matter of other regulations, you don't own the street in front of your house. So if you're running a business, you still don't own the street in front of your house.
So we have similar language for commercial uses currently in the code where it talks about like the area in front. I will say that one is a little more for commercial use. We just, you know, need to see that you have the allotted amount of parking. So it's not so much that you get those spaces as much as there's those spaces available somewhere close by. Do you think a change to more like that, or do you think it's more about something more drastic that changes it from?
Do you have the wording on what that shows for parking right now? I'm sure that was in here in the actual.
For our home occupations or for the commercial?
Yes, home occupation.
Yeah. So it currently,
Yeah, it says all parking necessary for the use shall be confined to the garage, driveway, or street directly in front of the dwelling. And then it references the building and site design standards.
So are you saying you want to get rid of the street in front of the dwelling out of that language?
I'm saying that I would remove, and I know that not everybody agrees with me here.
Just ask what
I
you're
would
asking.
remove all reference to parking. I don't believe in parking minimums. I don't think we should base just like the way that we regulate parking should be separate from these home occupation regulations, in my view.
Okay, I think.
I
bring up a
agree
very
with you
good
there
point.
because, and it says directly in front of the home. What if you're on a corner and they're gonna park on the side of the home? I think it just makes I think parking should be handled differently than with small groups that we're gonna allow for classes.
Well, here's how I kind of envision this whole thing going up to include parking. Because keep in mind, Galapagos and Huron are wide streets with lots of parking, but closer up to Denver, we have small streets with no parking. But rather, right now, somebody can complain about, say, a business next door, the people don't have a license. And code enforcement can use a very, very strict regulation to say yay or nay. They'll say, sorry, there's no law against that. Those people can do that all day. And that person, of course, is very upset. Or the reverse. This person is harassing their neighbor because they don't like the way that they just don't like them. So they're calling about their cars all the time. What this does is it is having an administrative hearing and making this whole document much more malleable. It can go to this hearing and you can really decide, somebody else can decide whether or not, is this really a nuisance? Or do we need to, or is they're just being harassed? It takes code enforcement's very black and white decision-making out of that mix, because they're often the ones who are getting the call, like Carl said, who's going out there? Well, it's because somebody called and said, there's people in and out all day. I've seen that one on Nextdoor. That doesn't necessarily mean there's even a business there. But then, see, it would be decided at that time about parking. Do we need to restrict how many people in your classes now because there's no parking on your street? That's how I see this going.
And I think these are two issues, but go ahead, Eric.
I was just gonna say that I live at Quincy and Clarkson, and every Sunday I have a group of 4 to 6 people that all meet right on that corner, park in front of my house, and go for a walk. And they're there for an hour or so. They're meeting as a group, parking in front of my home, but they're not going to any home there. They're going and walking the trails. So I think trying to enforce parking based upon where they are in the neighborhood or not in the neighborhood just makes it a really difficult call. for code enforcement.
Yeah. So this is still two separate. Go ahead, Carl.
You can, you can park in front of your neighbor's house. There's no law against that, but it's, your neighbor, it might make them mad or whatever. They might call code enforcement and say, hey, this guy's parking in front of my house all the time and I gotta park a couple of houses down. This is Inglewood. This isn't Denver. Denver, I go down, maybe like Logan or something in Denver, and there is no parking, period. And I want to avoid that. I don't think that Inglewood should have that problem. You should be considerate of your neighbor, and you should be able, it's a way to control a business. If you got too many cars out there, you say, well, this guy's operating something in his house. I don't know what it is, but he's got a lot of cars coming and going that's how they do meth busts. Is the houses just, car pulls up and 5 minutes later it leaves. That's how that happens. But anyway, that's, to have them park there all day long, that might be a problem.
Yeah. I mean, again, we're talking about home occupation. So I think we do want to make sure, again, this is things that are in homes, in neighborhoods that are, in not a business district. So I think we should keep, my personal opinion, I think we should keep the language that's there for the parking just as another tool for utilizing to be able to have a hearing come forward if it's needed. The question, though, that is up is, should home occupations be allowed to hold small group classes? And I was the one who combined these two, so I'm sorry. I will cut that back. Should home occupations be allowed to hold small group classes? I think we said yes with the limitation. Do we say 6? Is that what we're saying for small?
And this is for category 1, would not require.
Would not require. So basically you can have up to 6 people for a small group
I
class.
would suggest 6.
6. So,
Feels high to me personally, but
Yeah.
subject.
okay. Yeah. I have the same, but I think, go ahead, Carl. 5?
5.
Do I hear 4? Do I hear 4?
I agree with 6.
6. Camille?
You can always change it later.
We're at 4 3/4 now. So.
Yeah, I mean, 6.
6. Okay.
If it helps, also we can also take a peek at other codes again and
Okay.
see if there's some sort of standard out there. And
Okay. I think 5 or 6 is probably the number. I would probably go 5 also, but I would not lose sleep over 6.
Yeah.
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 Okay. All right. Then next question. Would you want to be notified if your neighborhood is proposing an occupation slightly more intense than is currently allowed by city code? What does that mean? What is
Yeah, I think that one was more for the community more. I mean, it is for this commission as well, but that one's really just that should there be some sort of noticing to go along with the hearing. So
Okay.
probably like a sign or something like that.
Would it
But
be
if
the
y'all
same
have
as like a
preference
PUD
on-
or rezoning where you'd have to?
if there was a public hearing needed,
Yeah.
would there have to be a sign or some sort of notification?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for conditional uses and variances, they only really need a sign. And what we do generally is give them a kind of a neighbor notification form where they kind of go, door to door knocking and can get, get their neighbors to sign off that they don't have any, problems or if they're in favor or opposed to it. So we could do something similar to that, if that
I think that
sounds
gets some
good to
nods.
everyone.
Go ahead,
If
Carl.
you've got something that's more intense than city code, why don't you disapprove it?
So this is for those category B uses. And so the reason I phrased this question this way is because we're asking people that don't really have all the other criteria and stuff in front of them. But this is really intended for those category B or those ones that are going to come before this commission for a hearing to see how they want us to handle those.
Yeah. So if it basically is going to come as a hearing, a category B that we're going to create, should they notify the neighbors? And I say yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. Okay. And should occupations have more than one, allowed to have more than one employee that does not live in the home? Yeah, so I think Aaron, you had said 2 earlier. I'm a little different on that, but go ahead, Brenda. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's an interesting question because we've just got done speaking a whole year about how many people can live in the home, only to be totally thrown under the bus by the state of Colorado, and there ain't no limits. So this is a tough question. Again, we have 6 people already going in for a class. So I'm kind of liking 3 though as well.
These would people that
Yeah.
would be there all day, potentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any
Keep
homes
in
in
mind-
Inglewood that are big enough to have more than 3 or 4 employees anyway?
I mean,
Yeah.
is it, with this,
And
like,
keep in mind,
is there
anyone that
daycare?
lives in the home isn't included in that number. So if you had,
Yeah.
2 people living there and then they had an employee, that would still be fine under the current code as 3 people working there.
Yeah.
It's only the people that don't live in the home that this is important for.
So could it be that this would create like, if we said 2, and then if you wanted to have more, then you would have to go to a hearing? Would that be?
Yeah. So if y'all wanted to, move, leave it at 1, bump it to 2, either fine, and then anything more than that, a hearing.
Hearing, okay. Camille, do you have something?
I guess I was just going to say that I'm seeing that up to 50% of the interior space can be used for the home occupation. And I thought that was pretty high compared to other places where I've seen it. So I guess just noting that.
Yeah.
With 1.
I think most communities seem to have that number at like 15 to 30 is usually what I've seen. And I feel like the low end of that might be like the tax portion of, like you can like write off a certain portion of.
I think you can write off like 750 square feet. So
Yeah,
I was gonna say 50% doesn't seem crazy to me considering the small house sizes here because you can, I mean, my house is 750 up, 750 down, and I didn't basically go downstairs until I started working from home.
Yeah.
And now that's essentially my office. But if I had 2 or 3 employees, that would take up effectively most of that space by the time you factor in a bathroom and a closet or something.
Yeah. And I will
It's
say
splitting
this
hairs
is,
to try to go nuanced beyond that.
and I will say that's a criteria that we haven't had anyone like complain of a violation for or complain of being too restrictive as far as the businesses go. I think again, it's one of those ones where it's in there because if you don't have a number, you could potentially have 100% of the site be a business, and suddenly you start skewing that home occupation into an occupation kind of a thing. But yeah, our number is higher than most other communities, but I don't know if that's necessarily an issue or not.
I
But
wasn't suggesting we change it. I was just noting that it was high, so you could potentially have more space
Yeah.
to home occupy.
How does the ADU figure in this?
Yeah, so the code was updated during Code Next to allow for home occupations and accessory structures. So whether that's your accessory dwelling unit or if that's in your garage or shed in your backyard, all those are technically you're allowed to run your home occupation out of those structures.
That actually reminded me, does short-term rentals fall under?
Yeah, short-term rentals are their own category, so they wouldn't fall under these home occupations.
Okay, it was shown as E, and I just wanted to make sure that wasn't.
Yeah, they have their own stuff to work out on.
I see. Okay.
Short-term
Yeah, I got
rentals.
you. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. The other one that I think was important was the trips per day, or number of people per day that could come. I think is limited to 8 right now. I would be okay increasing that also, but I think there still should be a number associated. It shouldn't just be an infinite number. I don't know if there's any other thoughts on that. Go ahead, Camille.
That's an interesting question because if you have a group class that you're allowed to have 6 people, then how many classes are you allowed to have a day? So, right.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think there was another line in there that talked about, one person at a time there. My mom is a retired music teacher that teaches private music lessons now, not in Englewood, so don't worry. But, that's creating a little bit of gray area of if someone wants to be a pain because they don't like that you run a home business, one student's there parked and someone else shows up 10 minutes early and now you have 2 cars parked. It could create the ability for someone to just make a complaint because they're nosy. The 8 per day, I'm with you. It's a little hard to differentiate what's too many because if you have a 6-person class, are you capped at 1 versus 3 or 4 employees working there all day? The impact is a little subjective.
No?
I'm actually comfortable with this if we remove the 1 customer at a time piece. I think it sort of creates a situation where you can have individual lessons all day long, or you can have a class in the evening, but you can't have group classes all day long. So I'd actually be comfortable with keeping a maximum of 8 or maybe 10, per day, while also removing that 1 customer at a time as we discussed.
So do you think you would you rather that be like a carve out for these group classes and things like that? Or would that be something where, you could have, 3 unrelated people come to your house for, I know it's on the prohibited use list currently, but like a haircut. So if you had, 1 person getting their haircut and 2 people waiting, are you saying you want something like that to be permitted, or have a carve out to where that would still be prohibited, but if you had 3 of these group classes a day where there's 6 people, that's fine, even though that's more than 8.
I mean, the way I understood what we were talking about before was that we would change the 1 customer at a time to something like 5 or 6 customers at a time. So if you had overlapping individual appointments, there's no concern about what he just described about somebody saying, oh, you had 2 people there, they were there at the same time, right? Because you've created that flexibility. But if you keep a maximum number for the day, then you still carve out, if you're holding group classes all day long, that requires an additional, permit versus someone who, has a day job and then runs 1 yoga class after work, right? Like that would be acceptable based on both the number of people at a time and the number of people per day, right? So that's the way I would approach it.
If we're gonna allow group classes up to 4 or 5 or 6 people, right? And those people are paying for the classes, well then technically you have 4 or 5 or 6 customers there at one time anyway.
And so then what Noah's saying though is so you don't have all day 6 people there all day for a total of 48 or whatever that is. You'd still limit it to either say you can have 1 person at a time, generally speaking, or up to 8 per day. If you want to have 6 all at once, then that means you can only have 1 group class. I think maybe we double, maybe you can have 2 group classes, so you can have 12 total and 6 at any given time. If we're talking, maybe is that like a number?
Well, somebody's gonna have 6 people in a group class.
Yeah.
8 times a day. At that point, they're so big, they're
yeah.
gonna be
Which again,
renting other office space,
self-regulate,
other
yeah.
Pilates studios, something else. So I think at some point, this conversation, just becomes moot.
Right, well, I think, too, you have to consider not just classes, but more realistically, we do have somebody in Englewood who grew vegetables in their backyard, and although they were selling the seedlings. So how many people are allowed to be there to buy the seedlings? And shall be limited to no more than, and how many all day? Should these people be allowed to sell their fruit stand to?
I would agree with Noah that I think that 5B right there, you just strike the last no more than one customer at a time. Keep the maximum 8 per day. You can have a yoga class with 6 people and then 2 individual sessions, you're category A, right?
Yeah. If
If
you want
it exceeds
more.
that, then you have to come and do a review.
Okay.
I think a good example would be like, let's say you're a work-at-home couples therapist where every time you have people, it's 2 people, and you could easily have 8 people per day, or you could exceed 8 people per day without being a nuisance to your neighborhood. So that'd be an easy pass, but it's like, are we now requiring every single person who runs a business sort of in that genre to now go through some city process that arguably is a waste of time if it is something like that where it's clearly not a big deal? Or is there a way to add some nuance to that degree?
I mean, to the point about
Go
the
ahead.
vegetable stand, like every time a person buys something and a transaction happens after 8 people, if that was like in the first hour of being open, you just have to shut down. Like, yeah.
Well, then I think that's when it could become a nuisance and would have to come to appeals and really get the input. I think the biggest part of that is then the neighbors have a voice to be able to say yay or nay, and maybe nobody cares, and
Yeah.
maybe it's fine.
I mean,
at
if they're
that
running
point.
a garden center out of their backyard for 6 weeks out of the spring, then yeah, somebody's going to complain, and they should come and they should, go through the process.
And they should have a voice to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that there's a separate portion of the code for temporary uses. So if you are having a sale for 2 days, then you go through the temporary use process and these don't apply, right? So the garden stand is only, like what Aaron was saying, would only run up against 8 people per day if it is an ongoing operation that is happening for essentially, all the time, right? So I think it's important for us to keep those things separate and remember that we do have an entirely separate process for temporary uses, and a lot of, these kind of examples might fall into that category.
Okay. Great. So I think, does that help
Yeah.
clarify that? Okay.
We had one. I think we have one more question. Let me jump around real quick. Okay. Okay. So for the prohibited use list, we kind of talked about this a decent bit. But for these kind of like mixed opinion ones, the mixed to negative ones. So automobile, sale, storage, or assembly of guns and knives, food and beverage services, manufacture of wine, distilled spirits, malt beverages. Are these uses we want to keep on this prohibited use list or move them?
Go ahead.
Move them off.
Yeah, and then Brenda.
I would like to see the food and beverage separated by consume on site and consume off site. I'm comfortable with consume off site being in category A. So if you, bake bread and sell it for consumption off site, if you brew beer and sell it for consumption off site, fine with me. But running a restaurant or having people running a bar is very different from those things. So I would just separate the food and beverage categories so that consuming off-site is in category A. And I think I would keep consuming on-site just in the prohibited list.
So, and just to confirm, is that the only one? Because I think the animal hospital, animal one, and barbers then would be the class B. We're saying.
I was just talking about food and beverage. I thought we talked about the others a little bit before.
Are you saying those are still class B? But you'd move.
No,
you'd
I would
move food
be
and
comfortable with the first 2 being class A also. I was just specifically speaking to food and beverage.
I
as
thought
this
we had said the
middle
first 2
category.
being class B. So if maybe we just need to clarify that, and because I think you were saying you'd move food and beverage offsite to A. Would you have anything in B then? Would you have any Bs?
Well, it would be based on the standards, not based on the list, right? So to me, it's when you're talking about the prohibited list, it's just, is it on it or is it not, right? So I would remove the animal and personal care from the prohibited list. I would remove food for consumption offsite from the prohibited list. And then whether it's in category A or B goes to the standards at that point. Not based on what occupation it is, it's based on what, whether or not it meets those standards.
So only performance standards for the category B hearings is the only metric.
Yes.
Performance standards is the.
Yeah, so the criteria that we judge them on, so the parking,
Number
amount
of visits per day.
space, yeah,
Okay.
customers at a time.
I think animal stuff you should have to get neighborhood opinions on it. That's my thought on it. And
I mean, just one dog can ruin your neighborhood if it's loud enough. So the idea of just
Run.
broadly allowing someone to run an animal daycare seems insane.
I think I'm not saying that we shouldn't allow it, but I think you should have a little more input from your neighbors. Allow for that. Barbers and hairdressers, I'm torn on that one. I don't know if others have opinions on whether that should be.
Is there like a scent issue with any of these things that like if you I'm just thinking of like cosmetology or whatever. I mean, nails and stuff have pretty strong fumes.
Scent.
Is there a
Scent.
concern
Okay.
there where if you're doing this and you live 10 feet away from someone else, is there going to be? I mean, I don't know. Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe
And
it's
that
no
would
big
still
deal.
fall under
Good.
the nuisance,
Yeah.
guidelines. So I feel like this barber, hairdressers, cosmetologist probably has its roots in a dark place. Over history, if we're talking about all of the other requirements that would put something into category A, I don't see why this would be excluded.
Okay.
Multiple animals, yes, I
Yeah.
could see that.
Okay, so we're saying barbers, hairdressers, those moving into A, with the performance standards. Everyone okay? Everyone, I know Noah. Everyone else okay with animals moving to a B that you'd have to have a. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just to
Yeah.
build off what Aaron said, I think I would also be comfortable with, like we did with customers, making a distinction if there's one animal at a time or multiple animals at a time. If you're running a grooming operation where you have one animal at a time, maybe that's category A. Whereas a kennel or a daycare, is category
I think
B.
if you
So
do
I'd
that,
be comfortable with that.
I think if you do that way too, but I think it probably makes it a little bit easier to interpret too, because it's not this like one-off that's the only category B. So yeah, like one animal at a time, like nothing else, and then if you want to do more than that, a category B.
Is it one animal and then an accessory animal? Like, so do you have your own animal and then you can have one other at any given time? Like
One
employee
paying
animal.
animal.
an employee animal? Yes.
Um,
Go ahead.
And I think key to this also is making that review process not overly cumbersome and accessible and easily understood by people that want to do this. I mean, there's, I don't want to stand in the way of anybody trying to grow their own personal enterprise or entrepreneurship and growing their business. So, balancing this in the neighborhood context, let's just make it easy for people to get that review and to notify neighbors and, make it an easy process.
I think that's all great insight. Oh, Carl, yeah.
Yeah, the food and beverage thing that's kind of hung up on that. Is there like a dollar limit that can be a monthly dollar limit?
No, so food and beverage services as the definition in the code is really those restaurant uses. Again, like the things that would fall under like cottage food laws aren't really applicable to this food or beverage services, currently. I think that deserves a clarification in this code, no matter how everything else shakes out. But yeah, I mean, if if I sell, one guy a cheeseburger in my house and he eats it, at my kitchen table, that's technically prohibited by the food or beverage services.
Yeah, if you sell one guy a cheeseburger and he really likes it and he gets the word out, you're selling 50 a day.
I would hope if I was doing
Next
my
week.
cheeseburger operation.
Then you get your restaurant.
Oh.
So, yeah. What if I pay you in beer that I bring over? Does that count as?
Only
Yeah.
on Saturdays.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Does the last column there, the manufacturer of wine, distilled spirits, etc., that seems to align with the thought about on-premises or off-premises food and beverage services? It feels like, Noah, you were essentially saying that you're fine with someone making it at home and selling it to someone, right? So those need to be differentiated or not?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, is to me, if you brew and bottle beer or wine or whatever, and you sell it as a product, to me, that's no different from selling any other product. But once somebody starts consuming it on site, then you're running a bar, and that's different. So to me, I think I would separate those things.
Is there going to be pushback about medical marijuana, since, as you said, you can easily grow weed in your backyard? You could sell it and people wouldn't consume it there.
Yeah. Marijuana in our code has a lot of distancing requirements that even if that one came off this list, we're not going to see any. I think it's probably better just to, personally, I think it's better to leave it on the list no matter what, just because I think it makes it a lot simpler for, everyone to see. But yeah, we have those distancing requirements for the city. We're basically boxed out as far as any future marijuana centers goes.
Yeah, do you?
And I think as far as marijuana goes, even though you can grow it, I don't think you're able to sell it.
no,
Battery's dead, but
No.
I agree. I'm not suggesting that you should be able to sell it, but just wondering in the context of this table.
So I think
for just my interest, is there like a marijuana lounge anymore in Inglewood? That's gone, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
so. I think Brenda, you had a question. Are we going down this prohibited list, or do we say the rest of them? Do you have comments on any of the? Okay.
Okay, so I do have some serious concerns, if you haven't told already, about the landscape, towing, and construction businesses. Look, there's a real low barrier for people like that to get into the business. For instance, Bridge House is a homeless to work program, and a lot of them are learning how to be a cook, landscape, and construction. Now, most of them are not going to go get a business license when they buy a house or rent a house in Inglewood, but the neighbor could call, say in a tow truck, a snowplow, or any of these things. I don't want Inglewood to put up barriers to earning an income for something that isn't a nuisance. So I don't want to see something strictly prohibited in that sense. Because, and keep in mind too, they're not towing on the property, they're towing somewhere in the street. They're doing landscape elsewhere, and they're doing construction. They're not constructing this house. They've just got a car, or it's a big vehicle. And we already have, like I said, we already have a law that says what kind of vehicle they can have on the property and in front. So I'd like to see that, I don't know what everybody thinks, but I'd like to see that slip into category B.
I support
So
that.
just to clarify, you're saying storage, operation, parking of equipment, large vehicles, towing, landscaping, maintenance, or construction business would be a category B that you would have to come to a public hearing,
Yeah.
and that's store because and
Is overnight parking or over the weekend parking considered storage?
that's I was gonna ask something similar, and you had brought up the point. You're not actually. There's no customers coming in. You are going out. Is that? How is that? Is that clarified?
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
like, yeah.
Yeah, as far as the way I've always interpreted this one, I see it more as lay down yards and construction materials and piles of dirt and
More than-
soil and
okay.
things like that. I do agree. I think like a clarification might be good to say, you can have your truck with the bed where you can have your mower and your equipment on it. I think a clarification says that's fine. That's okay. But yeah, as far as the way we would approach this one, if you had like 4 landscape trucks there, we would ding you for that and say you're in violation of this one. But if one landscaper was there and had his one truck that he that's not something we're gonna send a notice
We're,
violation
we're
for.
not trying to create an
Yeah.
HOA.
I mean,
With
I
yes.
think the, you've got a guy or a person who has started a landscape company. He's got the truck he drives, and he's got an employee, and their truck stays there. And the business entity is registered to that address. I mean, that's this is blatantly against that happening. And I think it sounds like we're all in agreement that we want to allow something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
So we
is
can't
there
figure out
just,
the language.
can you just set a
When I
limit
looked
on
at
like
the
2 or
store,
3?
Sorry?
I was just gonna say, I agree with that, but seemings like you could set a limit of how many work vehicles before it's a little too much for the neighborhood, but I agree, like, my across the street has a work truck or a van.
So maybe a clarification for that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, when I looked at storage of large vehicles, that, to me, that meant allowing somebody other than people that lived in the home or vehicles that were not registered to the home to be stored at your property.
Like a customer kind of thing.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So if you have, nothing in your backyard and you said, hey, you know what, I'm gonna let ABC landscapers park all their trucks in my backyard, I'm gonna charge $100 a month, I don't think that works. But if I got ABC landscapers and I've got a truck, my son's got a truck, and my daughter's got a truck, and we all live in the home and we're all going to work, then I think that's probably allowable.
Is there a limitation on size? So for example, if you are a tow truck driver and you've got a massive truck with a big bed, that's different than a F-250 with, lawnmowers in the back. Like, what's the threshold of small vehicle? I mean, just like the taxes, talk about 6,000 pounds, like, is there a vehicle weight where it's over the top?
Yeah, Brenda was mentioning that earlier, but yeah, there is, I don't know what the number is off the top of my head as far as but like, if you're parking your, semi there, that's a problem, but like, I don't know exactly what the number is, but there is a threshold. I don't think it's in Title 16 though. I think it might be an code enforcement of some sort.
Well,
Yeah.
you can park an
Yeah.
RV or a boat on
Yeah.
your property.
But not in the right of way, and that's mostly what this talks about, is it can't be over 22 feet in length in the right of way. There's not a lot of.
So what would the right of way be? The public
On the
street
street,
or the alley or what?
Okay.
Okay, so the only one on here that I don't think has had any discussion that just to make sure you're all in consensus on is the sales, storage, or assembly of guns, knives, or other weapons or ammunitions. Is that one something you want to keep on this list, or?
It's interesting.
at-
I am not a gun or weapon person at all, but I have known people who like repack ammunition.
Mhm.
I don't know why we would specifically exclude that.
You got really quiet with that AC going on.
Yeah, I think that goes, the hazard, is that a hazardous material?
I think
I mean,
that
it-
you're talking maybe about reloading.
Yeah. I don't even know the language to talk
think it's
about it,
called
but that's what I'm talking
reloading.
about. Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people do that, but it probably shouldn't be so.
Hmm.
And I think with this category, there could be some ATF stuff. Sorry.
Just turn your mic on just so we can hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Not just we, everyone can hear.
You just want it on the
Making a good
record?
point.
You just want me to say the same thing so it's on the record? Okay. No, I was just saying what you were talking about was probably termed reloading, like shotgun shells or whatever. But I think, that's probably allowed for your own personal use. But once you start selling that stuff, that could become an issue. And I just
Yeah.
wanted to say, we get calls sometimes from the ATF about people wanting to do stuff. So
Yeah.
it could be a bigger issue than just city code.
Yeah, and I think with like sales of it to track of it and all that stuff, I think I'd rather keep that on the list, but that'd be me. Carl, just yep.
How about a gunsmith?
Yeah, so currently, as far as this prohibited use list, anything to do with weapons or ammunitions of any sort would be prohibited.
What about knife sharpening?
I
I'm just, I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
that's a nuance
Is
in
it a
there because that's not
Rambo
really
knife or a
sales,
kitchen
storage, or
knife?
assembly,
Yeah,
but it kind
Doesn't
of,
matter.
it could kind of be assembly, but, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where we.
I mean, a friend of mine lives in Fort Collins, and there's this guy that drives around in a truck that comes to your place and sharpens knives, and that truck would be parked out in front of his house. And is that something we would specifically exclude, and why?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, as far as like mobile vans of any sort like that, that doesn't really fall under these home occupations because
It's
you're
the same as the
you're-
towing truck or the
Yeah.
landscape. They're going out. They're not
Yeah.
bringing customers in.
yeah. So really, yeah, I mean, yeah, like if someone was to do like in a mobile van like that, it wouldn't be
Wouldn't fall under this.
prohibited.
But what if a customer came to your house and wanted you to sharpen their knives in the mobile van parked on your driveway?
You gotta
Then
go on
it,
the
then it
street,
falls back into the prohibited.
which
I
would be
retract my
prohibited.
comment. Let's just leave the
I
No.
think we just keep
Okay.
it on
Yeah.
the unapproved list.
I would be comfortable deferring to the hazardous materials here and not specifying weapons in addition. I think there's, probably uses in this category that would involve hazardous materials. There's probably uses that would require, licensure that you can't actually get for a home occupation. But that's not our jurisdiction. So I would be comfortable taking this off the list and just leaving the hazardous materials prohibited.
But then if it's off the list, it's expressly allowed.
If consistent with the standards. So
Sorry, what was that, Aaron? Yeah, I hear what you're saying. No, yeah,
I mean, it's likely restricted, like Brooke was saying, by lots of other regulations.
sure. But if it was in here, I'm hesitant to take it out just in case it's not clearly restricted in other home uses in some place or another from some sort of legal standard. Just because it was if we were talking about adding it in, I'd be right on board. Like we don't need to specify adding it in, but it's already in at some point. So, David.
Agreed. I mean, if it's already prohibited, why change it? Leave it on there. Don't make it harder to find that it's not allowed.
And yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I'm fine with it. It's kind of a slippery slope of logic. Like there's lots of things not on this list that should be on this list, but I think it's fine.
yeah,
to leave
I
it.
wouldn't add it again, but I don't know that I want to pull it off either. No, is that okay?
That sounds
Camille?
good.
Yeah.
I guess one reason that I wouldn't want to pull it off the prohibited list is also, I imagine it would be a category B, which would require a hearing, and then people would maybe know where these things are. And my fear isn't necessarily that like the individual operating the business could be dangerous, but other people knowing where it is in a neighborhood.
Okay. That sounds good to me. I think that's it of my questions. That's all very good input. So I think we have good direction. Is there any final thoughts or things you want us to know before we start drafting it up for you guys?
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I wanted to request that we put in a specific reference to working from home for an outside business as presumptively allowed.
Yep. We'll add a clarification on that one too.
Okay, Carl, did you have?
Bartering, does that require, if you do something and you get, they give you some product in return, that there's no business license required there, right?
You said
It's gotta
bartering.
be money exchanged for a business license.
I would defer that one to our finance department because I don't know.
I guess, or Sergio, if you have any thoughts on the technical term, is bartering considered a sale of some sort? And if you don't, that's okay too.
I mean, receiving an interesting trade for services, we'd have to look at the code to see if, honestly, if receiving some signed autograph photo for a haircut or something, you need to pay like licensing tax for that. So I'm gonna be honest, I don't think anyone has considered that.
Okay.
But we can look into it, Carl.
Yeah.
Also, at the end of the day, the business license is like, I think it's like $50 or something like that. So, it's better just to get it, it's pretty good. And we're hopefully outside of this, the other thing we talked about with our Chamber of Commerce was ways to, kind of bridge the gap between home occupations and brick and mortar sites to where, hopefully the goal, I feel like, of any business is to, to keep growing in some degree so that you can, make more money. So
Your discussion of a yoga studio that we said couldn't have the group classes then ended up going into a brick and mortar, right? Like
Right.
that's a good thing in a lot of ways, and it seems like maybe that's helped them grow. So like, I think we want to make sure how do we support that next
Yeah.
step?
And so I think that won't be as much part of ordinance as it will be, policies and things like that. So we are working on that kind of side of things with like our economic development coordinator, as well as the chamber and our finance department as well. Those won't be necessarily attached to this, but that's also something we're looking at as well. So
Well, thank you for all the work that you've put in, and look forward to the draft, and we'll get that before the August 17th. No, is that the? So we're not meeting next
August 20th is the
August 20th
tentative
meeting.
public hearing.
Okay, would be the public hearing for that. So you'll send that out a week before or whatever that date is, and we'll be able to then have that final discussion on those changes.
Yep.
Great. All right, Carl. you good?
One curiosity thing is, a long time ago, there was a large group of like 15, 20 people. It was a yoga class in Duncan Park, and that went on for months and months and months. Can they use public property for a business?
I mean, as
I'm sure-
far as our regulations here are concerned, this is for the home occupations. I'd defer that question to parks. I'm not sure how they how they regulate those.
That's a parks permit.
You probably should have one, whether they got one or not, but yeah. It's a good, interesting question. Okay. So with that, move on to staff's choice. Any additional items?
I'm done talking.
Awesome. Sergio Attorney's choice.
I'm sorry, Sergio, can you
sure,
put your
yeah,
mic
thank
on? Thanks.
Looking into Carl's question real quick, administration of tax and license requirements 441 in the municipal code. The following shall be exempt from obtaining a sales or use tax license: garage sales, informal commercial enterprise where the annual income is less than $500, including lemonade stands and snow shoveling. So I guess if you trade something that's less than $500, you're exempt.
Awesome. Thank you.
So
Yeah.
there you go. And
Anything else that you wanted to bring up?
nothing additional for me. Thank you.
Commissioner's choice. I'll go around the room. I'll start Aaron.
Nope, nothing for me, thanks.
Eric.
Nothing for me either.
Carl.
Tomorrow, Thursday, they're having the concert out here, but they're having a demonstration with all the buildings, the office buildings over here across the park, across the Fountain Park. They're going to be, I think it's just a photo op basically for the developer that built them, because they're not renting. They've been sitting there empty for 30 years, and they got people in there which are rent free, but they're paying utilities, insurance, and taxes on it to get in there, but it's rent free basically.
So the home occupation should move into there, is what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
but that's the Thursday concert. That's going to be before the concert, and they're going to have the normal food trucks and beer trucks over there for Thursday.
Cool. Thanks, Carl. Camille.
Nothing for me.
David.
Nothing for me.
Noah.
Pass.
And Brenda.
I'm good, thank you.
Again, David, thank you for coming for your first meeting. Thank you all for being here tonight. I don't have anything else. With that, we can adjourn. Woo.